Okay, so the recording started and our session for the 6:30, 3:30 time period Pacific, I'm on Eastern time, is data-driven using course and institutional data for continuous improvement. And Bethany Simunich is our presenter. So Bethany, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay. Hi, everybody. As Jillian said, my name is Bethany Simunich. I'm Quality Matters Director of Research and Innovation. Thank you all so much for coming today. I know that we have a smaller group towards the end of the day, so thanks for hanging there with us. I see the participant count number going up. So this is going to be a participatory session. I'm going to ask some questions along the way based on little scenarios. So I am going to be asking you to type some things in the chat, and that should get us all to participate and collaborate a little bit as we go along. Okay. All right, so what are we going to cover today? And first, let me go ahead and stop my video just to conserve some technology resources here. All right, so today we're going to talk about different types of data to collect for continuous quality improvement. We're also going to talk through some of the most common obstacles and barriers in data collection, and then also discuss how to overcome them. And then finally, we're going to tackle how to analyze and interpret that data well. And that's the key there in order to improve online learning. Okay, so this is our reality for many of us at institutions, right? We're drowning in data. It's not that we have a lack of data. It really is a lack of understanding about how best to collect it and how best to use it. Okay, so we have a lot of information on course grades. We have a lot of information on data for our learning management system, mostly related to usage. For how our students engage and log into those courses and what they're clicking on. But there's also other institutional data that we have, such as drop, fail, withdrawal rates, enrollment information, retention, so retaining those students from the first year to the second year. But big questions that we have to ask in relation to this data is it meaningful data? Is it the data that we need to really answer the questions? And if not, what else do we need to collect? Okay. So really when it comes to our institutional data or even data that we're using for research, usefulness and interpretation is key. And I actually shared an article this morning by somebody that had a great quote in it that I wanted to share for you. And it was actually about COVID modeling, but data is data. But the quote is, numbers aren't facts. They're the result of a lot of subjective choices that have to be documented transparently and in detail before you can even begin to consider treating the output as fact, right? And I think that thought and that thinking is appropriate no matter what types of data that we're looking at. So remember that data is not research, right? When we do research, we really do put the questions around it that we want to. We plan it out. We have, a methodology and an analysis plan, but data is just one part of that. And really whether or not it's useful highly depends on how you're interpreting it. So it's really important to also avoid a rush to judgment. So sometimes when we look at those numbers, like maybe we're looking at those DFW rates and we see them climbing and we panic, but make sure you have the full picture before you start to really interpret the data and use it for decision making. Okay, so that does lead us into our first data story. So this is a little scenario, and then I want you all to think about what might be going on here and type some responses there in the chat window. So we have Michael, and he teaches an introductory level larger enrollment online chemistry course. His institution pulls data on drop, fail, withdrawal rates for his course, and his course has been identified as having a high DFW rate, which impacts his performance evaluation. So what do you think might be going on here? Should we just assume that there's an issue with Michael and Michael's teaching? Or what other information might this faculty or his institution need or want before taking some action? Go ahead and take a minute and type some of your ideas there in the chat. Okay, so yeah, Belinda, that's a good point. Maybe the student registered, you have students that registered for too many classes and they just can't devote the time they need to this. Kevin, that's a very good point too. Students may come in not prepared. Okay, so in this case, we find out that that's actually really important. So looking at this through a different lens, one thing that you may want to do in this situation is look at DFW rates over time and also by level of student preparedness. So it's just one example. WVU assigns a 1 to 5 institutional rating to all entering students based on their degree of how prepared they are academically. So if that historical data reveals that students have a low level of preparedness in courses with high DFW rates, we know that preparedness is an issue, okay? So it could be an orientation to the course to address general readiness, or it could be a development course because students may need some remediation help. So if DFW rates aren't correlated with low preparedness, there could be other things then that we might look at going on. It could be issues with the design. So this is an online course. Perhaps if we look at the student makeup, we see a lot of freshmen are taking the course, and maybe it's not well designed and they're confused and they don't know where things are. That also feeds into student readiness for online. It could be an issue with teaching, but especially with this lower level chemistry course, first we're going to look at whether or not students were prepared. Now in this example, this actually happened. So what was the issue that was going on? So down in WVU, this was the situation. And what they decided to do was to additionally interview faculty to try to figure out why students were struggling. Okay, because the data itself is not going to tell you why. It will tell you students are struggling, but the why is the real important information that you need there. And they also decided to do focus groups with students to figure out in what exact ways they were struggling. So in particular then for this chemistry course, adding student support and academic intervention measures did not help. Okay, so initially we thought, well, it's an issue with preparedness. Let's add some support measures around it, but that wasn't the entire key there. So interviews with the faculty revealed that students actually lacked essential math skills in some cases, but they weren't even aware of it. So they weren't even able to self-identify at the start that they needed help. And what they ended up doing was splitting this chemistry course into 2 segments so that students might be routed to a skills course if they don't pass the first segment. And then that allows them to get the remediation help that we know they need, even if they don't immediately know that they need it. Okay, so it's always our job to really strategize how we're approaching data and how we're approaching the analysis and interpretation of that data. So even with our example here, if we walk it through these steps, what data did we have? Well, we only had DFW rates, and that's just a number. So what are the limitations? Well, we know that there's high DFW, but we don't know why, and we don't know why students are struggling. So what new data then did WVU need to collect in this situation? They needed to talk to instructors to see why they felt students were struggling, and then also do focus groups with students. The best way to collect this data in this case really was to have some conversations around it via interviews or focus groups. And then that really gave them the full picture that they needed for an appropriate interpretation and really to move forward to solve this problem. So next we're going to move on to talk about examples of data to collect for continuous quality improvement, because it's QM and you know that we're focused on quality. Okay, so here are some examples of common data that we have at our institutions. We have data from student assessment, so this might be housed within our individual courses. You may collect it in different ways at your institution as well. So assessment both in the formative sense and also for summative assessments. We also do have that information for LMS data usage, and that includes good reporting data like early alert data. So when students initially are having problems and they're not logging in, we can really see that early on and hopefully intervene and help them out. There's also institutional data that our institutions collect related to retention, completion, things such as that. Student evaluations of instruction and potentially other student feedback. We'll talk about that in a minute. Also instructor feedback. Okay, so especially if you are, teaching a course that somebody else designed, or you are an instructor teaching, one section of a course, definitely collaborate and provide feedback to your colleagues about the design of that course so you can collaboratively, work on quality improvement. And then also faculty and professional development attendance and feedback. We have some data there. And so some of you may have internal programs for faculty development, or it could be faculty development additionally that individuals are taking through organizations like Quality Matters. But you definitely want to, gather data on that, especially, not just attendance rates, but also what are your faculty learning? Do they have the support and the information that they need to do well? So we're going to start into our next data story, and we're moving on to student evaluations. So we have Pat, and Pat teaches an accelerated 5-week, 100% online sociology course, and it's also writing intensive. So the student evaluation of instruction response rate for summer was low. 3 students out of 20 only responded. The evaluations weren't that great either. They were poor to average, despite the fact that a lot of students in the class, most of them, in fact, got A's and B's. One student rated everything low and also added comments that Pat was the worst professor he had ever had, which is probably not true. So what might really be going on here? How might this data be interpreted? What other information do you think you would need to really appropriately interpret the SEI data? Or what might Pat do individually even to address this data before the class is taught again? Go ahead and take a minute, please, and type in the chat some thoughts that you have in relation to this. What do you think's going on? Okay, that's a good point, Kevin. So the course might be too short for writing intensive, right? It is a 5-week course and it's writing intensive, and that could be an issue. And as you noted, we had a low student response rate. So in some sense, we're already making decisions based on incomplete data. Students might be feeling overloaded and burned out. You're right, Ivan. The accelerated nature, absolutely. Okay, so you guys hit on it right out of the gate there, that the accelerated nature of this course might be one of the biggest problems here. So what we might do in this situation is compare participation and grades and student evaluation of instruction, all that from the accelerated format with the full term format. So that would help us to drill down a little bit and start to get a sense of, is it due to the fact that it's an accelerated format? Also look at the level of preparedness for college level writing for the students. So in these writing intensive courses, of course you're writing a lot, and are you prepared to do that level of writing and to do that amount of it within a short period of time? Also, one thing that might be at play here is the timing and sequencing of assignments for both learners and the instructor, meaning in those 5-week short courses, as the instructor, I have to get those items graded with feedback and turned around in a very short time period so students can use that feedback to improve. So if I even wait a week and a half or something to return an assignment, students may not have the feedback in time to use it. That would affect their grades, and it would certainly affect their experience and their perception of me as an instructor. The other thing that we might want to do, I jumped ahead too fast there, sorry, was to really augment student feedback with instructor feedback. So spend some time, talking to the instructors about what they think is going on in the course or what their experience teaching the course might be like. So in terms of collecting student feedback, and let me just ask you in the chat, do any of you collect student feedback in your courses in addition to things like SEI? Do you build in, for example, anonymous student surveys, maybe at the midpoint, or another type of student feedback measure, or how do you ask your students for feedback? Okay, great, Kevin. So you give surveys in the middle and then also towards the end. Fantastic. Yeah, the first time that I teach a brand new course, I tend to do one at the end of each learning unit just to make sure that it's the right rigor and workload and whatnot. But in general, it's always a great idea to at least do student feedback surveys at the midpoint and again at the end. Also, if you experience that students are really struggling, it's a good time to just make one impromptu. Okay, that's a great idea, Rita. You asked for feedback at the end of each lab report. Okay, all right. So new types of student feedback, just to give you some ideas here on what to collect, because a lot of this data we don't get in other ways. So I know that a lot of us think long and hard about the workload estimate for our online courses, because Oftentimes online courses can have not enough or most often too much stuff, and we're actually exceeding the rigor and workload that we want. So we make our best estimate going out, but definitely always check in with your students, especially if it's a newly designed or a redesigned course, and ask them after they've completed a learning unit how long that it took. And that's going to be a check for you that you hit the mark. And then also ask them about the amount of work, because that gives you an idea about whether or not the workload is actually matched up to their perception. If not, then you know that you have to communicate a little bit more directly or a little bit more frequently about what the workload expectation is. Another thing that you could ask about, or whether or not students have great impressions about the design and the assignment work. So this is just an example of one question that you might ask related to whether or not students were able to understand what they were doing for assignments and how they might be evaluated. And of course, these also then link back to QM design standards, right? So hopefully you really attended to these design standards when you designed the course, and students should have that specific and descriptive criteria, for example. Okay, so it's also a check for you. Are these things being perceived by the students in the same way that you had perceived them when you designed? Also asking about the timing of assignments. So, again, that was an issue in our accelerated course, but it can be an issue in every course if students don't have feedback in time to really use it well for their future performance. And again, that ties back to QM standards as well that are listed there. Okay, now we're going to move into some potential issues and obstacles that we might encounter when gathering institutional data or interpreting it and applying it for making decisions. First, it's really important to know the limitations of your data. So as I mentioned earlier, data are just facts, usually numerical, but really it's dependent on how we interpret those numbers, okay? Because it's not the whole story. And there are some data, for example, the ones that we already talked about regarding student feedback, it really needs a purposeful effort. So really start to even kind of catalog what data that your institution is already collecting, what data the LMS is automatically collecting, what data you get from students on SEIs and things like that, and then sit back and think, what else do you want to know? What else do you need to know? And to really improve the design of your course or the effectiveness of your teaching, and make sure that you really theorize ways to get at that new data. If you're using also data for independent research, it's really important to consider your needs in advance. So what I mean there is, if you're doing SOTL type of research for your online courses, or maybe you're engaging in online learning or QM specific research, you really need to think about in advance what data you might need to answer the questions that you have, and can you get that data? Because in some cases, we may want to use institutional type of data or grade data for research, and it's important to understand that you may not have access to that for those purposes. So it's really important, to think out in advance what data you need and really how you have access to that. Okay, so that brings us then to another type of frequently collected data, LMS data, or analytics related to our learning management system. So most often, this will give us data related to LMS use or course access, whether or not students are logging in, when they're logging in, how often they stay logged in. It can be very useful for things, like I mentioned, for early alert systems. So when students are missing a deadline, or you see that maybe a student is struggling, and you look to see, well, how often are they logging in? Are they staying, clicking around and accessing different things? If not, that's a key probably to why they're not doing well. There's also reports that are geared towards learner engagement, and that is our next data story. Okay, so we have Mountain Valley College, and they wanted to gather data on student engagement in online courses. They gather data from the LMS on time spent in the course, and they see a very wide range, even within a single course. So what does student engagement mean in terms of LMS data, and how might they interpret this through that lens? What other data do you think they need, or would you want or need to aid in their interpretation? So you know the drill by now, attendees. Go ahead and take a second, please, and type in the chat. How do you think they might interpret this? Okay, time spent online. Compare time online to student performance. Yes, that's a good suggestion, Steve. Okay, Belinda, you're saying how long are students in the LMS? Are they putting resources to read offline? Right. So sometimes we may see that students aren't spending a lot of time in the learning management system. That doesn't necessarily mean they're not spending a lot of time on the course. They could, have limitations for their data or their internet and whatnot, and be downloading a lot of things to read offline. Time in the course may be when they step away for an hour. Absolutely, Kevin. So if they logged in and you're thinking, gosh, how could this student be struggling? He or she is logged in all the time. Well, it could just be that they are logged in all the time, but it doesn't mean that they're working on the course then. Okay, does more time in the LMS represent more engagement? And Danielle, you have the key question there. Maybe, but not necessarily, right? So it's really important to define what we mean. And that's the big lesson, especially when it comes to things like student engagement. What do you mean by engagement? Because most often for the LMS, it is just clicks, okay? So what's another way to think about this? Is there a correlation, as some of you mentioned, between LMS engagement and grades? So that might be the first thing that we look at, right? If we see a wide variety in terms of engagements, who's logging onto the course, how long are they spending, and grades, and maybe it is a pretty good one-to-one ratio. Students that spend longer in the course or who log in more frequently or more often, they have higher grades, and that might tell us then that there might be some direct correlation there. But in general, consider a more robust view of engagement. So we already mentioned some things that might be going on when we have students not logging in a lot. It could be they might be doing line off work. And being engaged with the learning management system does not equal being cognitively engaged with course material and assignments, okay? So again, when we're talking about engagement online, it's not just clicks in an LMS, it really is engaging students with active and applied learning, okay? Here's where we really want to think about General Standard 3 in conjunction with General Standard 5. So when we're thinking about our assessments, always thinking about moving it back to active learning and application and interacting with the content in engaging ways. Okay. I also wanted to talk a little bit about using data for continuous quality improvement and online learning research. So if gathering data for your own research, as I mentioned, you may be doing just independent research, or you might be doing scholarship of teaching and learning type of research, or maybe even institutional grant funded research. Know what data you need from the start, okay? So what do you want to know? And it harkens back to your research question. And why do you want to know that? So what are you going to do with that information? All right, if conducting research around quality matters or quality assurance efforts, you absolutely, though, have to plan in advance. And that brings us to our next data story. So Omar has been teaching online for 5 years and took QM's Improving Your Online Course workshop last spring. Over the summer, he worked hard to revise his course to meet QM standards, and in September, his course received QM certification. Omar's excited to see the grades of students this semester since they're in the revised QM certified course, and he hopes those grades are proof that QM quote unquote works. So if Omar compares student grades before the QM certification to grades after the QM certification, what other information do you think he'd need to get that full picture? And why might final grades not provide proof that QM works, quote unquote? What other data might he need? Go ahead and please take a moment to type in the chat. What do you think's going on here? What really would he have to think about beforehand in order to get that full picture that he wants? Okay, so Kevin making a good point here. He would need student level, freshman, sophomore to compare. Okay, so definitely we want to compare the demographics of students because we have two different student cohorts here, right? We have students who took, I'm going to call this the before version, and students that took the after version. Are the demographics of the students the same? So maybe in the before version, we had a lot more freshmen and maybe they were coming in with lower GPAs. Maybe in the after section, we have some more sophomores and juniors and they're coming in with a higher GPA or higher level of academic preparedness. That would impact it. All right. Student background as well, okay. What else? So for any of you that have attended the APPQMR, Applying the Quality Matters rubric, I want you to think about that online quality pie graphic, if you can remember that. Why can't I revise my course, look at grades, and say, well, this will tell me whether or not QM quote unquote works? All right, Danielle, he could also look at student feedback for overall course experience, okay? And what other factors might impact student grades other than the design of the course? Think of it that way. Okay, so Michelle, you said rigor, of course. All right, so you hit on one of the biggest things here. So in this case, for before and after Quality Matters certification, first of all, if you want to do research around this, and this is probably the most commonly asked about research project when I talk to members who want to do QM focused research, it really is important to get the full picture of before, meaning before I revise my course, before I do anything, I'm going to see how that course measures up. For example, I might do an informal QM review as it stands now, so I know which standards are currently not met in that course. Then when I make design changes to it, I'm going to document every single change that I make so that if I do see an effect at the end, I'll be able to look back and see what it might potentially be attributed to. If you don't know what you started with and you don't know what you've changed, you can't really determine why you have any changes in grades or other outcomes in that after version. So that's why it's truly, truly important to get a full picture of the before version. Okay, and then document any changes. But that online quality pie graphic that I mentioned, here's the real issue here that we have to consider. There are so many confounding variables when it comes to online learning. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say that I have that before and after course, and I teach one version of the course, in spring, and I teach the other version of the course in the fall. What if I don't teach both versions? What if I redesign it and my colleague teaches both versions? Well, that's a difference in teaching. How am I going to account for that? Okay. Or it could be that I've spent a lot of time on course design, but I really haven't spent a lot of time developing my online teaching skills. And a great course design is great, but it's no match if I don't have the effective teaching with it as well. So teaching might be a factor here. Student preparedness might be a factor, okay? So maybe I have a different cohort of students this time and they are less prepared, or maybe they are continuously, less than prepared, and the design isn't the biggest factor here on whether or not students, do better grade-wise. Maybe I've changed content, or I've added content and students are spending more time. And that comes to one of the biggest things that can happen when we improve the quality online course. And this goes back to the comments about rigor that Michelle made in our chat, that sometimes when we improve the quality of our course and we take a course maybe that has a low design quality and we redesign it to meet QM standards and it goes through that formal review process, we have a higher quality course. But we also have a course that is more academically rigorous. So you have to ask ourselves, did we prepare students to be successful in this new course? Because if the previous version was, let's read some chapters from the textbook and we're going to take some quizzes and we're going to do some multiple choice exams and I'm going to put up some lecture notes. And I revised that to this really engaging course where students are interacting with multimedia and they're really applying every step of the way what they're learning. Maybe I have some group work and they're doing some creative things and presentations. Well, how did I prepare students to be successful in this new course? Okay. It was actually a lot easier to get an A in the before version in that example, wasn't it? So sometimes when we see a dip in grades, it could be that that before version was actually too easy and students were doing well because the rigor wasn't there. Once we brought it up to the appropriate level of rigor, you may see a different distribution in those grades. It's also really important in any before and after research study to gather student feedback. right? So ask them in the before version, what's working well, what is not, and let them know you're thinking about revising this course. What changes would they suggest? What things were most helpful to their learning that they would recommend you definitely don't take out and that you keep in? I feel as though we don't have enough conversations with our students. So don't hesitate to ask them what's working and what's not working, and to really collaborate with them on the revision of courses when we're really looking to improve the quality. Okay, so I did want to leave some time at the end for some questions, but I also wanted to let you know that if you are interested in conducting research, and when I say research, I mean the whole gamut. So it could be that your aim is to conduct research that you intend on publishing in a scholarly presentation or scholarly publication, or it could be that you're doing focused work and you really want to improve the quality of your own course. It could be you're an instructional designer or faculty developer at your institution and you really want to look at the success and the metrics of your faculty development. So some things that QM has to help you in those efforts. If you didn't know, we have an online research toolkit and it's publicly available. It's on the QM website. You can link to it right from the QM research page, and it will walk you step by step through designing your course. Designing your research project. We also have a searchable Quality Matters research library. So this contains all of the scholarly publications and the research that really support and inform the rubric. And it also includes publications, academic and scholarly publications that deal with online teaching and learning. So you too can submit articles to be included in the research library. So if you're conducting research or if you read a great article related to online learning, definitely take a moment to go there and submit it so that your colleagues can have access to that citation as well. And if you didn't know, we also have a dedicated workshop related to research. So right now, I'm the current facilitator for the ABCs of Online Learning Research Workshop. I believe our next one is coming up this summer, and it's either June or July. And that's really great for those of you that might have the beginnings or starting to think about an actual research topic. So what happens in the ABCs is myself as the facilitator, but also your colleagues in the course, we provide you feedback every step of the way as you work through drafting out your research design. So by the end, you really do have a design that you can take and carry with you and move forward. I'm also available via email or Skype sessions as well. If any of you, want an individual research consultation, or if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me. But now just to spend some time with Q&A. So these are a lot of things that we talked about today when using data to inform and improve. What are some new pieces of data that you're thinking right now you might want to collect? So, if you're in faculty development or if you're in instructional design, it may be that you're going to start to collect information about instructor satisfaction related to faculty development or the course design process, anything such as that. Those are things that we typically don't collect, or it could be student feedback data. Or how can we even have better institutional conversations about bridging the gap between the data that we have, the data that we need, and really thinking about interpreting it, thoughtfully. So go ahead and please do type in the chat, what are you thinking about right now? What are some new pieces of data you might want to collect? And I'm going to go ahead and start my video again so I can see all of you. And Jillian, do we have any questions in the Q&A?
Hi, Bethany. No questions in the Q&A so far.
Okay. Jillian, as an instructional designer, was there ever any data on courses that you wish you had when you were working with faculty? Did you ever wonder, do instructors like the instructional design process? Or asking them about satisfaction measures such as that?
Yeah, that would be very interesting to know. I don't know that I wondered about it at the time, but because I was working so closely with them, I kind of knew, their thoughts on it. But to have a formal sense of that would have been good.
I always, whenever I do faculty development or when I was working as an ID, I always try to include something that is a reflective piece as well, because sometimes I know that faculty need to kind of sit with things and then come back and reflect on it. Okay, so I have a question from Rita. Yay, there's so much data related to COVID-19. Boy, is that true. What do you think are some good strategies to collect this data in real time? Well, you know, I have an answer for that, Rita, that I probably wouldn't say at any other time. And that might be use your cognitive resources wisely in the sense of, I think everybody is so full up right now, cognitively and otherwise, just very, very full. So I would spend the time really connecting with students and asking them how things are going, how they're doing. I would definitely incorporate some anonymous student feedback surveys. So for example, a lot of LMSs have a survey tool that you could use anonymously, but you could also use things like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics and then just share the link with your students. But something that checks in with them about things that maybe we normally wouldn't ask about, but these are students that didn't sign up for online. So ask them, you know, do they have the technology they need? Are they concerned about internet access? And ask about other things that actually really are crucial and impactful at this time. So is there, you know, food security issue, insecurity issues, or are they unemployed? Are they dealing with having small kids at home, doing remote learning for their K through 12 classes? So that would be my best recommendation there for a good strategy. Give some anonymous student feedback surveys. Also do some reflective journals to allow them to share how things are going. They may have confusions about this new type of learning and how the course is laid out, and questions that they kind of think are dumb, but this would allow them to really ask all those and share them with you. Hi, Fernando. Are there specific efforts to correlate the QM standards with accreditation standards? Well, that is a very good question. I know that we have had some presentations in the past actually that have dealt with this very well. So QM Connect conference presentations I'm referring to. So I know that there are a few out there related to QM standards and really correlating them with accreditation standards and needs. So one thing that you can do to kind of find the those older presentations, you can do a simple search on the QM website. And I think there's like 4 or 5 of them, but it is something that I personally am getting more questions about. So I might do a more concerted and concentrated effort there in the future. It's a very good question. Thank you. While we're here and we have a couple minutes, do me a favor, please, and type in the chat. Are you faculty? Are you an instructional designer, administrator? Okay, faculty. JJ, you're all the things, right? That was my cat, Charlie. He wants to tell you that he's not faculty. Okay. Okay, so the majority of, thanks, JJ. So the majority of you are faculty, and so keep in mind that you do have control over a lot of the data that you collect, because you can collect student data in those courses, but also definitely check in with folks at your institution if you're not sure what data that they collect. Definitely take a chance to look at those LMS analytics and see what data your learning management system collects, how you might use that, and especially what additional information you would need to appropriately interpret that. For those of you that are instructional designers, so Danielle, I know we have at least now 1 instructional designer in here. You know, as I was mentioning to Jillian, whether or not you're doing, oh, and Ivan as well. Okay, if you're doing faculty professional development related to online learning. So I know IDs do a lot of presentations and training on LMS for faculty, online teaching even, different facets of designing their course, or maybe you have a set design process at your institution that you take faculty through. So for any of those things, definitely devise even just short surveys to ask faculty, is this information helpful? Their satisfaction level with the training or the process. You may even consider incorporating before and after knowledge checks, so to make sure that your faculty are getting the information that you need them to have when you're doing the training, so that they feel well prepared and supported. Yes, that's a good question, JJ. Maybe we could have virtual coffee one day and talk about that. Okay, and Jillian, yes, great follow-up. So speaking of surveys, don't forget to complete the session evaluation. Jillian has kindly linked it there in the chat window, so please do that.
Yeah, and we do still have 10 minutes, Bethany, for
Oh,
question and
I
answer.
thought it ended at 10 after.
Nope, I'm showing 7:20. Let me double check that.
I bet you're right,
Or
Jillian.
4:20. Yeah, so we still have some time. I didn't want you to think you
Neither
didn't
Jillian nor
just.
I know what time zone we're in or what time it is. So what's the best session that all of you have attended today? Go ahead and type it in the chat. No, it's not a loaded question, Steve. I promise. Because there were sessions that, I mean, I couldn't watch all the sessions either. So like all of you, I'm going to be waiting for the recorded sessions, and I want to know some tips on what to focus on. I watched the one on discussions this morning, moving beyond the post and reply, and that was great. That was definitely one of my favorites. Yes, fabulous keynote, Danielle, absolutely. For any of you that are new to online, or you're new to remote teaching, or if you have colleagues that are new to remote teaching, we also did a session I co-presented with Penny Ralstonberg from Penn State World Campus, and we did a session called Now and Later about remote teaching strategies, where we also talked through the Quality Matters Emergency Remote Instruction checklists. So if you haven't heard about those, those will be collected, and I'll add those as handouts to that session, and you may want to share that with colleagues. Okay, yes, yeah, Ivan's, that's the one. Now and Later Strategies for Transitioning. Yep, thanks. Oh, Rita, I did not see the AR/VR session, so I might check that out.
Well, I don't see any more open questions, so I'm thinking I may stop the recording here, unless there's any final words you might want to say, Bethany. But we do have the room for a few more minutes, so everyone is welcome to ask Bethany any questions they might still have.
Don't ask me to produce citations, but you can ask me research questions. Thank you, JJ. I appreciate it.